on top of the opiate stuff, particularly in alcoholism. Isn't there an in there, the pre-existing research things, the University of, or in Philadelphia, for example, at the VA, they have a good drug unit. Any leeway with that? Any entry?
I think the thing that jumped out at me from what the new director of the VA, who's now a doctor and not a veteran, I think it's the first time we've had a non-veteran director of the VA, secretary of the VA. I think he actually keyed on suicide. I think he actually is looking more at cannabis to prevent suicide. I don't even know if he's discovered cannabis's opiate overdose reduction capability yet, which is, really out there. I mean, it's journal articles and everything about it. They just, really haven't picked it up yet. And as far as, what their program kind of does and doesn't do, I personally, started this many, many years ago, recognizing that if you got drug tested out of your clinic because of use of marijuana, then you wouldn't be able to use cannabis as an adjunct. You wouldn't be able to get the opiate overdose reduction. You wouldn't be able to get any of that. It's like, do not pass go, do not, So that was what for my work, and I'm happy to say that the VA, not just under my pressure, but a lot of pressure, has actually come up with fairly decent guidelines that makes it so that you shouldn't really be, if the doctor's following the guidelines and following the procedures and everything laid out, you really shouldn't be arbitrarily kicked out of treatment because of a quote-unquote failed drug test. And that may not sound like much, but that's like kind of where they're at right now inside the system. And as far as, I get the feeling like two things. One, they really can't participate. Like a lot of us, are like, oh, the VA's got all this funding for research and stuff. Why can't they do some of this research? Well, they just really can't. They can't get involved in a lot of this kind of political stuff that's going on. But that doesn't mean they're not really closely paying attention to the results that we come up with. And the results of opiate overdose reduction and stuff like that, I absolutely, I'm sure of it. I'll just knock on it, I'm sure of it, that they are actually paying attention. But as far as, I guess the VA is probably, you guys can answer it maybe better, but probably, be able to really handle this when any other part of the federal government is able to handle it,
Do any other panelists want to address that question? Go ahead, Ellen.
Kind of just touching on the end of what he said, the important thing to remember is the VA can't touch it. They're federally funded, they're federally run. So what we really need to do is put all our efforts toward getting cannabis to stop being a Schedule I substance. It's ridiculous that cannabis is a Schedule I substance and it's listed as having no medicinal value and not being safe to use even under the supervision of a physician. So with that in mind, we have a lot of stigma to change on a federal level, and with that will come the veterans. And I think the veteran voice is what's going to make the federal government wake up.
Yeah, this is a really key thing. I mean, obviously, medical cannabis for veterans is important in and of itself, but also medical cannabis for veterans lifts the whole effort, not just for veterans. So it's an interesting intersection that there's a specialization, but it's part of a bigger movement.
Well, I'd like to add one more thing.
Yeah.
I think if you make it clear, we're talking about men and women who served their country under orders from the government, and then they come back with service-connected disabilities in the form of, one of them, combat-related PTSD. Okay, so that's very clear. We're talking about a very specific group of people. These people have served the country. The country put their trust into the men and women to defend the United States of America, and they came back and did so in an honorable way. So I think the federal government, the VA, needs to listen to the veterans, and the government who sent us over there in the first place. They should listen to the people that they entrusted to do that mission, and that is the veterans. And that's why I think that another reason why our voice needs to be heard through the federal level, just like we've just talked about right here. The VA is, in Michael's words, we have an inherited relationship, a lifelong inherited relationship with the VA because of our service to the government.
Mike and I took a meeting with the American Legion last time we were in DC, and it was interesting that they're pushing for it to go to a Schedule III because their thought process is Marinol's on a 3, so that's where cannabis should be. We don't want it to be a 3. We want it to be taken off the schedule altogether. Absolutely.
Thank you, Patrick. Thank you. Grandma Cat Jeter.
Thank you. One of the questions that I have regarding cannabis use for PTSD relative to veterans is we always talk about the trauma associated with combat, and certainly we all accept that. But there are a number of ways in which folks are traumatized. Military service is inherently dangerous, groundbreaking work. I'll use my own example, being first woman in combat units in 1977. I think we need to learn to expand our understanding of PTSD within the military context and broaden it so that we can better serve. In particular, I think about our women who disproportionately share sexual trauma associated with military service. And can you speak to plans to broaden that understanding?
Thank you so much for your service. That's amazing. So as a female veteran, what we're seeing is more female veterans coming forward and talking about those kinds of problems, or sexual trauma as well. And I have seen the VA really listening and heeding what the female veterans are saying. I know that when I go to the VA in Cape Cod, they are asking me, do you have any trauma? We do have resources here for you. So they are trying to be proactive, and that's where I live in Massachusetts. So if you know a VA that isn't being proactive, it's really important to speak up and make sure that they know that these programs are available. But I am seeing more happening, and there is more of an attention that now that we've been in over a 10-year war, there are more female veterans coming and then coming out of service and then having PTSD or having other related issues. So I am seeing a pop-up of more female clinics or female-oriented this, or like a safe space just for women. Veterans make up about 7% of the population, and then, women are such a small portion of that. So it's like we all, I don't know you, but I love you, and I love everything you've done. So it's like, how can I help her? How can we work together? So just being a resource for each other, I think, is the biggest thing, because I'm here for you and you're here for me.
Go ahead, Michael.
I want to just maybe give you a peek behind the scenes. I think it's important to know kind of movement strategy kind of perspective. Maybe this won't cut out as much. When we first started looking at adding post-traumatic stress to the state laws as a qualifying condition, as a national effort, as a veterans effort, we were looking at the success from California, of course, but that was kind of unannotated. In other words, it's not specifically listed as a condition. There's no qualifying condition list in California. But New Mexico, when it came online, did have, the first post-traumatic stress qualification listed specifically. And we got that specific data and that result together with Sesamet trial, which is this Marinol-like copy of THC that was successful on post-traumatic stress in a double-blind trial up in Canada, and all this data on a cannabinoid receptor system from Israel, and all that together, we decided to go to the States. And the first state that we went to was Oregon. Oregon had Ed Glick and Lee Berger. They've been working for years on this package of conditions that were all considered psychiatric conditions, and the 7 of them, trying to get them added as a package of qualifying conditions. I came in, and others came in with this veterans idea. Number one, carry it alone. Just take post-traumatic stress and deal with it alone, and make it a veterans issue. And I say make it a veterans issue because we are talking about it as vets. Vets are more likely, statistically per capita, to be injured, to be wounded, to have post-traumatic stress. But there's certainly much more post-traumatic stress sufferers out there that aren't vets than that are vets. And we recognize that, but we also recognize that as veterans, we can pull this away from the psychiatric, literally de-link it from the psychiatric connection, and make it a veterans issue, and get it through the legislature, get it through the state houses, and get it passed as a qualifying condition. We never, ever intended ever to be saying anything other than, we as veterans are suffering this, they're listening to us, let's do this, representing all patients. And at every step, I think, actually making it pretty quite clear that we're doing this as, like the tip of the spear for all patients, and to make sure that all patients, and I think we've actively tried in many places to bring in the first responders and a lot of other kind of groups. It's been challenging, actually, and very, very happy to see the women's veterans coming forward, but we need more input, we need more help on that.
So we don't have a lot of time left, and I've got one more question. So any further comments on Grandma Cat's question? No? There we go.
First of all, I want to say thank you to all 4 of you for taking the time to do the interviews with me. You guys have amazing stories. And Patrick, I just wanted to ask, you developed the PTS pen. Where is that at right now, and what's that all about?
Well, thank you for bringing that up. We have created, in medical, we created a tool to help with PTSD. We did a 2-year study in medical with a vape cartridge. And for 2 years, I collected data with veterans, combat veterans, rape victims. You had to have certifiably have PTSD. And we created what we believe, first of all, is going to be the first PTSD rescue vape cart on the market designed to help a veteran or a victim of PTSD with a trigger. It's going to be an amazing product, absolutely. I have teamed up with CPC, Jeremy Coffin. If anybody knows Jeremy Coffin and his team, that's an amazing group of guys, and they're helping me with the project. Also is Odo. Odo is helping with the project, but it'll be hitting the market sometime around the 1st. It'll be found at the 22 Too Many Veteran Support Depots that are spread out across the state, and yes, it's going to change. It's going to change. It was created by victims of PTSD, for victims of PTSD, for sure. Thank you for asking the question.
Thanks, everyone. What we didn't get to, but I want to just raise real quick, is that question. Obviously, veterans are patients, but they're also part of the emerging cannabis economy in many ways, because their familiarity with their medicine, their knowledge about growing, whatever else, and also that jobs for veterans is a big deal. And I remember I was talking with Aaron a little bit earlier about how that's also part of the organizing that's going on there. So there's the political and the economic aspect to it. All right, folks, thank you so much for a wonderful panel. We are just honored for your service and for you being here today. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Next up,